and welcome back to Film History. This week we are covering the 2000s, roughly 2008 to 2016. Some of the films and the information overlap a little bit with the previous and the next lesson. So what we're addressing here, the theme is CGI franchises, because it's really in the mid-2000s that CGI franchises, superhero films, really take off. So we're talking about Lord of the Rings, we're talking about the MCU, the DCU, and all the variety of films that come out, including Avatar and Gravity, which make use of CGI in a really brilliant and new way. So before we get into all that, let's talk about the election and what's happening politically in the world. So we have an Obama election in 2008. Kind of a surprise candidate, comes from nowhere, really catches the public imagination. And of course, he has to oversee the supervision of the bank bailouts and the rollout after the catastrophe of the great financial crisis of 2008. So really starts his administration on a tough footing. We also have a lot of mass shootings during this time. This is when this really begins to take off. Sandy Hook, event after event, we cover that. Globalization and Chinese manufacturing are a huge influence on America, and of course Hollywood as well, because the Chinese market becomes a huge market during this time. And films are being marketed and geared towards a Chinese audience. We'll cover that in the video compilation. Okay, so this is now a huge market, 1.4 billion people, and Hollywood films want to tap into that. So this really ties into the emergence of franchise films. Films that the franchise is essentially, we're not going to make one, we're not going to make two, we're not just going to make a sequel, we're going to make dozens of films. We have them sort of planned out. 2001's Lord of the Rings sort of got that started, where they made 3 films in once. And that idea got people thinking, wait a minute, we can maybe plan out all these films at once. We don't have to make one at a time. And we can save money, and we can really have a product that we can deliver, almost like a television show where we're delivering constant product, constant movies every year or two to people. So we see an explosion of CGI technology that makes this all possible, including technologies like motion capture and performance captures, ways of what the films Gravity and Avatar really work out, even before it, Lord of the Rings, is how to interface live action acting with CGI. So you can have CGI characters and live action actors together in a single film, and it doesn't look goofy. It looks good. The eye lines match up. So we see an explosion of all these technologies. We also see, as I said, a lot of sequels. Hollywood loves its sequels. That's where they make the most money. Sequels, even if they're worse, make more money than the original most often. We also see a lot of mergers in Hollywood. It's becoming more and more corporate. We saw that with The Player, but in the 2000s, it even goes further, and it really condenses down into 5 major entertainment companies, 5 major studios, with Disney being the dominant one. And what we see is a Disney takeover during this time period, where they really buy up, and by the end of this period, they're going to have about 36 to 40% of the market under their control. Other tech that comes along. Big tech that comes along in this period. I'm sure you guys are all familiar with it. This sees the emergence of social media, smartphones. Streaming appears first in 2007 and really becomes adopted by the population in 2010. Let's not forget digital cameras and editing really explode in this time. Editing had already happened, had really transferred to digital, but starting around 2010-11, most films start becoming shot on digital cameras. It's really only a few sort of auteur holdouts like Tarantino and Nolan, who will still shoot on film, who can afford to, because it's much more expensive. We also see the emergence of AI in this time period, which will only continue into the 2000s. And we also see the emergence of a lot more diverse voices in American cinema. We see the emergence of Mexican auteurs like Del Toro and Cuarón with Gravity. And also new roles for women. We see a lot more exciting and interesting roles for women. There is a renewed feminist consciousness in Hollywood, and we start seeing more action roles and more roles that would traditionally go to men. Also women starting to direct, and so on and so forth. So that's all progressing during this time, and it really manifests in the last period, which we'll cover, the final class, 2016 to present. So to get to the films, we have couple films we talk about. I didn't feature it, but Lord of the Rings, a major important film in this time, advances in CGI, motion capture, and they really showed everyone you could make a bunch of films at once and make a bunch of money. And those films were very famous. The final one in the series winning, pretty much sweeping the Oscars, sort of a reward for all three films, which made a lot of money for Hollywood and brought a beloved classic to light, Lord of the Rings. Next up, we have The Dark Knight. Now, this is a film I'm sure many of you have seen, and this is a very influential film. This is a post 9/11 film. I didn't include it in that chapter because I wanted to put it with the CGI films, but this film is more than any film a post 9/11 noir, and it's a crime thriller, and it deals with the attitude and the mood of the nation post 9/11 very effectively. It's also the most artistic superhero film, which is another reason I selected it. Christopher Nolan, a great director, and really brings a lot of interesting elements to this film. Next up, we have Avatar, very famous, international success, advances the technique. James Cameron gives us visually stunning things to look at we've never seen before, and that comes out around 2007, 2008. Next, we have Gravity, also further advances in technology, particularly capturing space and bodies floating in space. We see a female protagonist in a role that may have traditionally gone to a male. We also see it a Mexican director, so it's evidence of Hollywood sort of diversifying and opening up their roles for people. And lastly, we finish with probably the most obscure film that I'm going to list here. This is not an important film in the traditional sense. This is something that I put in because I think it tells us where Hollywood's going, and specifically with AI and CGI, essentially replacing actors with previously shot footage or compiling new images from existing footage. And we see that in the Congress. I think we're going to see that in society coming up quite a bit, where actors will be digitally replaced, old actors will be brought up, and I have an example of that. And so that's a whole new world in Hollywood, and it's going to really affect the bottom line, and it already is. And in many ways, they don't really need to shoot backgrounds anymore. They just need props and actors, and everything else can be faked in the background. So how will that change things? Okay, great. So that wraps up the films and this period. Very important period in U.S. history, and a period where technology in particular, both in the world and in Hollywood, really comes to the fore. And we see that dramatically changing Hollywood, the films that are produced, CGI franchises. It's a big, big business now, and the cost of making these films is very expensive. And so what we start to see is a death of the mid-range budget film. So we have low-budget films like horror films that will be made cheaply, and we'll have expensive, high-budget franchise films. But what's missing is that mid-budget adult film, which television in this period, which is going through a major renaissance, really starts to take away from movies. And so we see shows like The Sopranos, Breaking Bad, and others really attract that adult audience with really intelligent, dramatic series. So, what will the future hold for Hollywood? We will see, because streaming is beginning to take over during this time, and movie attendance is in decline. Let's not forget, we also have the emergence of HD TVs and digital networks, digital internet. So it's all coming faster, broadband, quicker, and the movie theaters are just not looking quite as attractive. All right, hope you enjoyed the lesson. Reach out if you have any questions. Make sure to watch the compilation video, which will get into some of these topics in detail.